Today we will see update user attributes in API from API. Okay, so I think that the update user attributes are spending for a long time, so we will cover that today. And the what types? The what types also little bit important topic, because we are just seeing the front end only. Like, if you remember, we have integrated an app we need. We just entered only the login URL, logout URL and also the base URL while integrating an OpenID Connect app with Okta. But in the back end it's like many things are happening. Okay, so what are all the different types of flows and which type of flows will be used for which type of applications? Okay, that we will see. So if you remember we have seen until that day. So okay, authorization code flow and client credentials code flow. Resource owner, password flow authorization code flow with PKCE. The final one is implicit flow, which is not frequently used to know because the replacement of this implicit flow is nothing but authorization code flow with PKCE. So mostly we will cover all these flows in our slides and you will understand. You know how the user account informations are getting transferred and how the user access informations are being transferred, so I hope you have this. Terms, knowledge also right. So during our discussion we have discussed about this authorization resource server. Do you want me to refresh it, or it's fine? Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so let's start with this authorization code flow. This is a basic flow, so to. Enable this authorization code flow. As we discussed on that day, we need a web server, okay, which means an application which we are going to enable so with the help of this authorization code flow. That application should be hosted in a web server. Okay, the reason why I'm saying it should have a web server is there should be some space to store the client ID and secret ID. Okay, so if you remember, we have integrated an app with Okta and we got this client ID and secret ID. Okay, two IDs we got and we need to transfer both the client ID and secret ID to the app application team so that they can able to configure that client ID, secret ID, at direct. Okay. We will see here how that client ID and secret ID will help us to validate the authorization and authentication part. Okay, so here you can see in the top 4 components, which is the user. User is nothing but to you or the end user who is trying to access that application, and the regular web app, which is nothing but an application. Which application we are going to access? Okay. So it's a web application and you can see author, tenant. Author tenant in the sense here you can understand, make outdoor tenant in replacement with this Okta. Okay, this is nothing but an Okta tenant. Or if you want to make it in a clear or open ID terms, then it should be authorization server. Okay, authorization server. And your API is nothing but our API, where all our data will be stored. I mean the database wherever all the user information and the details are stored. Okay, so that we will see how it is getting integrated. Okay, so the first step will be click login link, which means for. And another thing, I will tell you another trick. Actually, so for all the applications that is enabled for OpenID Connect, there is no flow that you can trigger from IDP, which means from Okta, always the URL or the application access will be initiated only by the application URL. Okay, so that you have to make sure for auth applications, for all the auth applications, you cannot enable a IDP-based flow, which means you cannot log into dashboard and you cannot access that application in dashboard, Okta dashboard. Okay. Then obviously that's an IDP flow. But for OpenID Connect Flow applications or workflow applications, there is no IDP-based initiated flow. Okay. Actually, there is a trick. There are some tricks that you can enable SWA for that application to enable that application tile in your Okta dashboard. But it's just only a trick. Okay. It's not like a direct usage that you can make use. Okay. So here you can see, once you log in or click that link, okay, the URL, let's say, for example, an application URL, okay, https:// maybe some application .com, something like that. Okay, once you enter the URL, the request will take you to the application web application where to the server, basically where the web application is hosted. Okay, so that way. They have a merged and they are mentioning just like a regular web app. Okay, now, once the request reached the application server, the first thing that it will happen is the application will request with Okta for authorization code. Okay, authorization code is nothing but an alphanumeric value. Okay, it's like a randomly generated code. Okay, that code will be requesting by the web app. The web app will request the authorization code detail from the Okta tenant. Okay, authorization server. So it will ask like, can you please share the authorization code to me so that I can validate the authorization code and I can grant user access with the applications. Okay, that is second step. Now once the Okta tenant receives that request from application, okay, what Okta tenant or authorization server will do is it will ask the user to perform the authentication and authorization, which is nothing but a user ID and password. Okay, you have to enter the user ID and password. So that, what's that? That's what this third step mentions. Okay. Redirect to login/authorization prompt, which means you will be redirected to the browser, which is an Okta, with the Okta console Unity. Enter the user ID and passwords. Okay, in the third step, you have entered the user ID and password. Next, the fourth step is authenticate and consent, which means once you enter the user ID and password, okay, the user ID and password will be validated by the user, which will be validated at the Okta tenant. Okay, if you see it's an auto tenant, which is nothing but an Okta tenant. Okay, so once the user ID enter the password and the credentials, it will be validated here at the Okta end. Okay, now the validation has been completed and Okta identified that the user ID and password is correct. Now the request has been completed successfully. The authentication has been successfully completed. Now, once it is authenticated, Okta authorization server will send the authorization code. So, if you remember, this authorization code has been requested in the second step. Right in the second step, only the application have requested for the authorization code which is being generated at the fifth step. Okay, just a sec. So, the authorization code has been generated at the fifth step. Okay. The authorization code will be sent to the application now. Okay. If you see regular web app, okay. So that is fifth step. Once the author of the first step will be requesting for authorization code, then a Okta will route the user to enter the user ID and credentials. Once it is entered, It will be validated at the Okta end. Once it is validated at Okta end and the user ID, a password is correct, then Okta will issue an authorization code to the application. Okay, that's what this fifth step. Once the authorization code has been received, okay, there will be a string will be generated. Okay, string is nothing but an alphanumeric value. Okay, how it is generated? So, if you remember, in second step, the application have requested for authorization code, which has been shared. At the fifth step, okay, which means Okta have sent an authorization code to the application. Now in the sixth step, the authorization code which we got from Okta. That will be the first component and the second component will be the client ID. If you remember, we have generated client ID and secret ID, shared to the app team where they will store it in their application. Okay, both that value will be merged and it will be converted as a token. Okay, totally, 3 components, authorization code plus client ID plus secret ID. All these 3 will be merged and converted as a token. Okay, that will be sent back again to the Okta tenant. Okay, if you see that, what happens at 6th step? Okay, now, if you remember, Okta have generated this authorization code, flow in the 5th authorization code in the 5th step, and Okta knows the client ID and secret ID whenever the application integration happens. So once all these 3 things are merged from the application and it is being transferred from the application to the Okta, Okta will validate all these 3 whenever that token got it, whenever the Okta received the token from the application. Okay, that's what here it says. 7th step, validate authorization code plus client ID plus client secret. All the 3 informations will be validated at the Okta tenant itself. Okay, is it clear? Any questions on this? Yeah, okay. So once Okta validates all the 3 components, okay, because the authorization code has been generated by Okta and it is transferred to the application. Now application. A build that 3 information added together and it will send it to the Okta. Okta will again validate all the 3 information because authorization is the one that we have generated after have generated client ID. And secret ID is also generated during the first time itself. Okay, so all the 3 informations will be validated. Once it is validated, if it is success, then an ID token access token will be issued to the application end application. Okay, by Okta, which Okta is nothing but no authorization server. Authorization server will issue the ID token and access token. So what is the difference between ID token and access token? So this may be an interview question. You can just make a note if you want. With the help of the ID token, what we can do is we can able to get the identity information from our API, Okta API. Okay, with the help of access token, we can able to get the list of access that we have for that application from the Okta API. Okay, that is the only difference. If it is ID token, we can able to get only the identity information, for example, first name, last name. What is my login ID? What is my location? So those things okay, or the access token will help us to get the access information. What level of access I have? Until what? You know the timing level that I have access towards that application, so those informations will be there at the access token. Okay, to get that information, access token will be used. Okay. So here you can see, the 9th step. Once the ID token, access token has been issued by authorization server, which is nothing but an Okta server, to the application, with the help of that access token, OK, the application can able to validate the user's authorization and user's information, OK with, which is hosted in the API. So, if you see, the last one is Okta API. So, is it clear? Do you have any questions on this? Yeah, this is authorization code, flow from Okta to API, write Okta to application. Yeah, Okta to a regular web application. Okay. Okay, so that's a here. If you see it is validating the code which is generated by Okta. Okay, that's the reason it has been named as authorization code flow. Okay, and I will come to this one authorization code with PKC before covering these two, because authorization code with PKC is more related to authorization code flow. Okay, that is the reason. Yeah, so same thing. User, okay, application here, auto tenant, which is nothing but an Okta tenant, and API, our Okta API. Okay, so we will see how the data is getting transferred between this. Okay, the first one is a user trace means what is that to perform? That PKC is nothing but proof. Key code XH, PKC proof key code exit. You will understand what is the meaning of this PKC in this flow.